In 1968, with Italy's victory in the European Championship over Yugoslavia, they came out of what was the worst period in their footballing history up to that point. 18 years in which there was absolute blank, with the failed qualification to the World Cup in 1958 and 0 semi-finals achieved in major tournaments. All this would lead to the birth of a golden generation in Italy. Their eventual victory of the Euros was in part helped by the incredible players on their roster, boasting the likes of Gigi Riva, Sandro Mazzola, and Dino Zoff, to name a few. Fast forward 56 years, and Italy have just been eliminated in the last 16 after an abysmal display against Switzerland, marking their worst period since the 70s. These are Italy's results from the last 18 years in major tournaments. 2008, they were knocked out against eventual champions Spain in the quarterfinals. 2010, they were going into the World Cup as champions, and what a fantastic display as Italy managed 2 points in a group with New Zealand, Slovakia, and Paraguay, so they went home in the group stages. 2012, they managed a Euro final beating teams like England and Germany before being humiliated by Spain on live television 4-0 with Casillas asking to respect the Italians in added time. 2014 saw another early exit in the World Cup with Costa Rica and Uruguay getting the better of them. The only positive note was beating England 2-1. I remember waking up at 6 AM to watch that game, just to realize I actually messed up and the game started an hour earlier. The Euros of 2016 saw them drop out in the quarterfinals against Germany. This was probably one of the best displays of the team in these years. They were playing good football and had a good manager in Antonio Conte. They only lost out on penalties against the Germans. 2018, they failed to qualify for the World Cup, losing 1-0 to Sweden in the away game before drawing 0-0 in the return fixture, giving them the aggregate victory. One of the most emblematic moments of those years came with De Rossi, when asked to warm up for the return fixture, seemed to say, "Why am I coming on? We got to win this game, a draw is not okay." 2020 was the highest point of the national team. 37-game unbeaten streak and a Euro victory beating England at Wembley, gifting us this iconic moment. 2022 again failed to qualify to the World Cup in Qatar, but to be fair, I actually think they had a good qualification run, albeit drawing a few too many games. They went unbeaten in their group and basically just got unlucky with 2 matches, which can happen. But that was enough to force them into a knockout game. The worst part was the win or go home round against North Macedonia, game which the Italians dominated but went on to lose 1-0 thanks to a long-range shot from Tarkowski. That match hurts a bit more because Italy had 32 shots against their 4. But hey, as Nemanja Matic said, that's football. If you don't put the ball into the net, you can't expect your opposition to be as generous. And so we come to the most recent Euro campaign. Elimination from the round of 16 against Switzerland after frankly a very bland tournament. An early first half performance gave them the win against Albania. They got outplayed against Spain on every level. Di Lorenzo still dreams about chasing down Nico Williams. A very lucky draw against Croatia with a 97th minute equalizer from Zaccagni that gave a bit of false hope, and again outclassed by a decent Swiss team. Eliminated in the same place where 18 years prior they became champions of the world, at the Olympiastadion in Berlin. Man, whoever's writing these scripts is having so much fun right now. Gravina's term as president of the Italian Federation is coming to an end, and this performance certainly didn't do him any favors, with the national team being bashed by several news outlets and important people in the Italian media. Fabio Caressa, a renowned commentator, defined it unwatchable. Fabio Capello said Spalletti overrated the formation. A lot of people were calling for the sacking of the Italian manager, just to be surprised as Sunday came the announcement that he would continue on as head coach of the Italian national team. Decision I frankly think is the right one. Sure, he prepared the tournament in a very sort of, let's say, unpredictable fashion, but it is also true that he has had less time to prepare the players, and also, if he were to be sacked, who would be brought in? Allegri? His style of play doesn't fit very well with the national team. A very defensive-minded way of playing the game, and I doubt Conte would want to go through the experience of being the manager again. So the only viable option is to remain with Spalletti unless they want to go down a route I'm personally not a fan of, hiring a foreign manager to manage the national team. Luigi Garlando, a well-known Italian journalist, had this to say to sum up Spalletti's tournament. The good tailor cuts a suit to fit their clients. They do not impose one upon them. His frequent changes during the tournament of tactical style. During the 4 games the Azzurri were involved in, there have been 2 different formations used. For the games against Albania and Spain, a traditional 4-3-3 with a regista like Jorginho and two box-to-box midfielders in Barella and Frattesi was utilized. Then the same lineup was repeated against Spain, where they got outclassed and outplayed. With the game against Croatia, the players were sent in with a very interesting 3-5-2, a vastly different defensive shape with Pellegrini, who had played the first two games on the left, starting as a midfielder, before reverting back to 4-3-3 for the knockout game against Switzerland, this time playing in midfield more prone to attack with Barella, Fagioli and Cristante. One of the most questionable choices was perhaps that of starting Fagioli, who had been banned for 7 months for a betting scandal and had played only one competitive match before this tournament. Maybe he was hoping for a Paolo Rossi type situation. In 1980 he was banned 2 years for match fixing, but despite that, Enzo Bearzot decided to call him up for the World Cup in 1982. Decision that turned out to be correct, as he scored a decisive hat-trick against Brazil that won the match and became the tournament's top scorer, carrying Italy to their third title. This, of course, hasn't been repeated. Bringing a player severely underprepared in a tournament like this was a pretty big gamble. Another one was sticking with some players like Di Lorenzo, who played every game, even though he was struggling to contain Nico Williams against Spain and didn't show any particular flair against Croatia, so his morale was pretty low. I don't think Spalletti didn't have any other options. He could have played a young Bellanova, which couldn't have done worse than the Napoli left back. Playing Pellegrini on the left for his first 2 games was another decision I found quite strange. Sure, he's done it before during his career, and I think under Mancini, he played a few times on the left, but always drifting towards the middle. At Roma, he's always played a more central role, be it as an offensive midfielder or in between defense and attack. So him being there was a bit out of sorts, and it showed as Pellegrini played below his standards. One could say that the players didn't certainly help him. The 4 strikers didn't score a single goal with other players underperforming. This is in part due to the frequent tactical changes and the lack of intensity in training. The team didn't have any cohesion, and if you've ever played Football Manager, you know that's bad. Everything here could be chalked down to one thing: skill issue. Now don't laugh and allow me to explain. While researching for this video, I came across an interesting stat. Out of the entire Serie A, 67% of the players are foreigners. That's more than half the player pool. By contrast, the number in Germany is 31%, and in Spain it's 42%. The Italian league relies heavily on foreign players, sentiment that has been echoed by Capello. By having so many foreigners, less and less Italian players are going to be picked by the academies, so fewer players will have the opportunities even if there are some really good talents. You wouldn't find a model like Klopp's Liverpool, who relied heavily on youngsters. That if you're good enough, you're old enough sort of mentality. With this, there's also an additional problem. If Italian players aren't getting much playing time in Serie A, it's even worse outside the league, as very few players are getting exposed to big game football. If we look at the team that went to the Euros, we find that out of the 26-man squad, only 3 play outside of the Italian top flight, and only 2 play consistently, both of them being the keepers Donnarumma and Vicario, with the third one being Jorginho, who plays for Arsenal. If we look at the teams of France and Germany, we can find major differences. I'm not going to count England as they have the most competitive league in the world, so their players are consistently exposed to high pressure and big games. We can find only 1 player that is in a foreign league, with that being Jude Bellingham. But anyway, I digress. For France, we can find 16 players that don't play in the French League 1, while for Germany, we find a much more modest 7, with 4 of them being key starters. After the first big no period for the national team, this problem was heavily addressed by the Italian FA, with a limitation imposed on foreign players that could play in the Serie A. The results were the win of the European Cup in 1968 and the World Cup final in 1970. I'm not saying to go through a repeat of that, but I think asking the various clubs to make a bigger use of Italian players can be fundamental to develop the team for the future. I read something that said Italy has 1 youth development center. Switzerland has 3. Of course, this hasn't stopped the U17 and U19 in winning the Euros in their respective categories. But less and less of these players are managing to break into the first team and making an impact. most of them getting a few minutes per season and then getting loaned out to Serie B or Serie C sides. I mean, just looking at the stats in the top 10 goal scorers in the league for this season, there's not a single Italian player, and as for the assist charts, there are two, both at the bottom. In 9th and 10th, Politano and Bellanova. One wasn't called up at all, and the other didn't play. Italy lacked the ability to score goals. In their 4 games, they scored 3 goals, while in Euro 2020, which was played in 2021, they found the net 9 times in 4 games. You could see that there was much more cohesion and the energy coming from the players was different. They were enjoying their football. I'm not actually totally sure how Italy won Euro 2020, and that is coming from an Italian who watched every game. It was a sort of perfect storm. Right manager, and Italy had massive momentum pushing them after the group stages. And of course, a super Donnarumma took care of the situation when things got tricky. Italy won their games really convincingly. The only one where they looked a bit more out of sorts was against Spain, but they still managed to pull through. There was also a good mix of experience, something that they lacked this time. There weren't any real leaders like Chiellini, Bonucci, or even Immobile. This was the 3rd youngest team in the tournament, and in some games you could tell. There wasn't anybody to pick them up and get them out of their slump. Another thing that is going to help impact the number of Italian players is the Decreto Crescita coming to an end. For those that don't know what it is, it's something that helped the clubs pay less taxes on a foreign player, allowing them to give slightly higher wages. As you all can imagine, a lot of clubs use this to acquire players. With this coming to an end, they might have to look a bit more into their youth setups. Do I think the slump will last forever for Italy? No, but the truth is I'm not sure when it will end. I can't predict at all how competitive they will be at the World Cup in 2026, or for that matter if they would even get there. What is certain that a much needed rebuild is needed. If I'm not mistaken, a few days ago a list of players that were getting dropped from the team was released. I'm not sure how legitimate that was, honestly. It will be interesting to see how they can navigate this period they are in. I do think that giving Spalletti some more time will be beneficial also for him to understand how a national team works, as he has had one too many outings with the media this tournament. Certain things that maybe should have been addressed in a different situation. It's certainly unfortunate to see a dynasty like that of the Italian one coming to an end like this. 4 World Cups to their name, and that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the amount of legendary players they have had in their roster. As an Italian, I do hope that this will end soon, and I really want us to be competitive again in future tournaments,